You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Hi, I'm Dr. Teodros Avery. I'm the professor of jazz studies here at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. And today is the 10th session of the class entitled Key Movements, the Age of Jazz. Now today I'll be talking about the film The Great Gatsby, the 2013 version, which is the most recent version, and it's based off of the book of the same name, The Great Gatsby. Let's talk about the author of The Great Gatsby, who is F. Scott Fitzgerald. See a picture of F. Scott right there at a younger age. He was born on September 24th, 1986 in St. Paul, Minnesota. Originally named Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, he was named after the author of the lyrics to the Star Spangled Banner. That author was also a distant relative of Fitzgerald's mother. Fitzgerald was considered to be a very promising writer at the age of 24 when his novel, The Side of Paradise, received glowing reviews. Shortly thereafter, Fitzgerald married his wife, Zelda Sayre. And you'll see a picture of them together in a moment. There they are right there. Okay, next photo. Now, what Fitzgerald did was chronicle and satire the culture of wealth, extravagance, and ambition that emerged during the 1920s. In The Great Gatsby, we have two main characters, one being Jay Gatsby, he's a mysterious millionaire, and then 2, Nick Carraway, who's an aspiring writer. Now, you have to realize that at the time, the music was going, Prohibition had started, so there was the illegal black market for liquor. Music bands were playing music that people really liked. The Flappers were taking their position after the women's suffrage movement. So this is a time of a lot of celebration. There was a lot of pushing and pulling of the cultures, but at the same time, there was a lot of celebration of life. And there were a lot of Americans who were pursuing the American dream. And so you had people who were trying to make as much money as possible. They were really going after these opportunities that the American economy had awarded to the public. So there were people playing the stock market, there were investors in the stock market, and people were really going all in and making lots of money. And then you had, at the same time, you had a widening gap between the very rich and people who were middle class to poor. This movie focuses on the wealthy. So you're gonna see extravagant living and people just really having a good time. So we're gonna watch a clip from The Great Gatsby, and it will give you an idea of how the people were living in excess, that there was just lots of booze, lots of fun, lots of parties, lots of people making money. So it was a good time. And also, this movie takes place in Long Island and in the Hamptons. If you know anything about the Hamptons, that's where the most wealthy people in New York City tend to vacation or have a second home, or their first home and then have another home in Manhattan. So this is about the lives of those people. And just to give you some foundation for what you'll be saying, and just so you can get a visualization of what was going on in your mind in this region of the country, and also in Long Island, which is a little, it's situated a little bit of a distance from New York City, but that this is where the wealthier people lived in this area, the Hamptons. They call it West Egg, but it's the Hamptons. So here we go, we're gonna watch a clip and you'll get the gist of what I've been talking about and really understand how they were living and how they enjoyed themselves. Here we go. This is The Great Gatsby.
The whole city packed into automobiles, and all weekend, every weekend, ended up at Gatsby's. And I mean everyone, from every walk of life, from every corner of New York City. This kaleidoscopic carnival spilled through Gatsby's door. Caravansary of billionaire Playboy publishers and their blonde nurses. Heiresses comparing inheritances on Gatsby's beach. My boss, Walter Chase, losing money at the roulette tables. Gossip columnists alongside gangsters and governors exchanging telephone numbers. Film stars, Broadway directors, morality protectors, high school defectors, and viewing Clipspringer, dubious descendant of Beethoven.
Gatsby? I've never seen Mr. Gatsby, sir. Well, no one has.
Alone and a little embarrassed, I decided to get roaring drunk. heavyweight champion.
Everyone respects you.
You be careful now. You're turning into a real jazz hound, Commissioner. That's the commissioner back there.
Politicians all over money. What the hell are we calling them?
You be careful of those tables now, Senator.
I'll put it right on for you, Jay.
Carter, New Kennedy, no ordinary Joe, you a privilege.
We'll have the lobsters decorated with truffles and fine herbs.
No prohibition for my coalition. I need 100 bricks on them 100 rocks. I got 100 jobs.
So you see, they were living it up to the fullest. Of course, this isn't a reenactment of the older version of the movie and also the book. But I chose this movie because I wanted the students who might teach the class to really be able to lock in, and I thought they could do that if they saw Leonardo DiCaprio and Jay-Z, hearing his music, as opposed to Robert Redford. Although you should also be aware of that version if you only know this version. But so when you saw the clip, what's important to note is that they were really going over the top with living, the richer, more wealthy people. In this case, Jay Gatsby was a very, very wealthy person, and so he had these lavish parties, and he would invite everyone to the parties. This is fiction, but it's based around the lifestyles that they were living at the time. So you see all kinds of characters at the parties that you probably wouldn't expect to be partying with each other. But he was at a lot of these parties with his wife, and he was viewing these parties. So I don't think that is far-fetched to assume that he's pretty spot on with the different people who are attending the same parties who should not be attending the same party, if you know what I mean. But now, I hope you noticed that the women were dressed as flappers. They were dressed in the French style dresses, and they had the bob haircuts. That was the style, the flapper style. Pretty much all the women were dressed in that style, and they were partying and really carrying on. And what you want to really check out is that they were totally different from their parents, that this kind of living was not really seen before the 1920s, that people were really reserved morally and in terms of just how they carried themselves. I mean, these people were really living their lives to the fullest and didn't really care about what foundations or what axioms have been laid down by their parents, right? This was about like living life right now. You know, this is the American dream we're going for. We're making money, we're spending money, and really just trying to enjoy it. Also, this is during Prohibition, and liquor ended up being cheaper on the black market than it was when it was not illegal to buy. So when you mix in liquor at a fraction of the cost of what it used to be, then people are going to party even more. They're going to drink even more because it's less expensive to do so. So as you saw, you know, everyone was feeling toasty, right? So you get an idea that the liquor was flowing pretty fluidly, I'll say, pretty consistently. So also you're looking at a mansion in the Hamptons, extremely huge, wealth beyond, you know, most people's imaginations. And so F. Scott Fitzgerald was going to a lot of these parties, and what he said about the time was that it was just iniquitous. I mean, people were just going all in and didn't really care about what the consequences were. So he really wanted to capture that lifestyle and that way of thinking during the 1920s. And he really did with his book. But that you want to understand that this was a deviation away from American culture of the past, that they were going to something new. and they really wanted to feel carefree. They wanted to enjoy themselves and not have to feel guilty about it later, as in the past. And they just really wanted to enjoy that. Now, there is also use of music from the time, in this film in particular, from that time period. In this next clip, I'm going to show you, you're going to hear Gershwin's music, George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and that was he was one of the premier composers of that time. We went and we talked about him a couple weeks ago, and I spoke about how influential he was, and that he was a genius, George Gershwin, and that his music was highly influential during the time. So now we're going to look at another clip. Actually, first we're going to look at a clip of, or listen to a clip of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. So you're just going to hear it. Then you're going to see what they did with that song and how they combine it with a scene, and you'll see how they used it to accentuate a visual scene in the movie. So first we're going to hear the clip. This is George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. So let's listen to it. Okay, so you heard that was probably the climax of, well, it was the climax of his composition, but the most grandiose sounding part of that composition. You hear the big sound of the orchestra, the piano really playing forcefully, and it's massive. The sound is massive. So what they did with the music in the new version of The Great Gatsby, the film version, the 2013 version, they took that grandiose sound and they adapted it to the scene, and it really, really made the scene even that much more bigger. So now we're going to go to a scene in The Great Gatsby, and you're going to hear that same composition in the background when Jay Gatsby appears, and you'll hear it. You'll see it and hear it. Here we go.
This face is familiar. Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war? Oh, yes, the 9th Battalion. I was in the 7th.
Excuse me, I knew you looked familiar. Having a good time, old
Oh,
sport?
the whole thing's incredible. I live just next door. He sent me an actual invitation. Seems I'm the only one. I still haven't met Mr. Gatsby. No one's met him. They say he's 3rd cousin to the Kaiser and 2nd cousin to the devil.
I'm afraid I haven't been a very good host, old sport. You see, I'm Gat.
His smile was one of those rare smiles that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life.
So you heard the composition at the end when he put his drink up. And that just gives you a real idea of how grandiose this time period was and how the music reflected those times, right? And then the film took that sound and gave it to a visualization, a visual moment, and really expanded that. Now, at the same time, there were a lot of different issues in character. Not all of the characters were perfect, and you will see that some of them are conflicted. Now, what I'm going to have now, there's a psychoanalyst his name is Dr. Jared DeFife. He went through and analyzed the different characters, and he's going to speak about Jay Gatsby in particular, and that's just going to allow you to have some different ideas about what you're saying, because you could just look at everything and feel like, wow, this is such a, a happy time. Everybody has money and everything's just great and perfect. But then he goes through and he analyzes it based off of his knowledge of psychology, and you can relate that back to Sigmund Freud, who we spoke about a few weeks ago. And this process of being able to analyze the situation is directly related to Sigmund Freud. And I pointed out that during this time, Sigmund Freud emerged. So psychoanalysis is now being used to analyze a film about the period of which psychoanalysis came out of. So here we're going to watch this man talk about a psychoanalysis of The Great Gatsby. Here we go.
This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Gatsby, he had a grand vision for his life since he was a boy.
I'm gonna fix things just the way they were before.
Just you and me. No amount of fire could challenge the fairy tale he had stored up in his heart. Gatsby.
The question that everybody is interested in is, who is this Gatsby fella? Who is the millionaire playboy next door? Before there was Keeping Up with the Kardashians, before there's What Would Ryan Lochte Do, there's The Great Gatsby. And who is this Gatsby guy? And so we have a sort of natural attraction to wealth, power, youth, beauty, and so that's what draws a lot of people next doors to the lavish parties that Gatsby throws. But to really understand who Jay Gatsby is, I think it's important to think about two primary emotions, one being shame and the other being grief. The shame part of Gatsby is that he's a boy from a small town in North Dakota. He talks about, at some point in the middle of the novel, we learn that he's ashamed of his lower class upbringing. His parents were sort of shiftless farm workers, not very successful. And Gatsby is described as a self-made man. From this shame, he starts to create a persona. He changes his name, he leaves his house for the army, and creates a persona of himself molded as a reaction against the shame. And it's important to sort of see the difference between emotions of shame versus guilt. Guilt is a feeling that people feel when they feel they've done something wrong, some kind of action, they've broken some kind of moral rule or law that might get them in trouble. Shame is something more fundamental. It's a feeling about the self, a feeling that something about the self is wrong or damaged. And to understand Gatsby, you have to see the ways he reacts against that shame of those lower class upbringings. And he does it in this exaggerated, lavish displays of wealth and ostentation. When he first meets Daisy, he doesn't feel that he's going to be good enough or make enough of a living to support her or to woo her away for the marriage. And so that kind of explains the drive between these lavish displays of wealth. It's what psychologists would call a reaction formation against that shame of being poor. When it comes to feelings of shame, there's something about yourself that's fundamental, that you worry about what people are going to see or think of you or how they will react to you. I think that's why eyes become a powerful symbol in The Great Gatsby. It's this notion of who is watching, who is looking out over, who is seeing you, not for the actions that you do, because the characters are relatively without guilt about their actions, but they are very afraid of being seen and the negative things about them being seen. Another primary emotion that's important to understand with him is that of grief. You would look at Gatsby as showing a sort of complicated grief reaction about his loss of Daisy and their engagement. That when he went off to the war, she left him. And they met briefly before he deployed, and he didn't come back in time and she left him. And what happens in distorted grief reactions is time sort of stops, or people try to recapture lost time. And it's something that's talked about very heavily in the novel. It's why it's such an important theme is time stopping, trying to get back to a certain time. Gatsby is really trying to reclaim that lost era. In fact, there's a scene when he meets Daisy for the first time after so many years that he almost knocks a clock over on the wall, on the mantle. It's almost as if he wants time to stop, back to that time when he was 17 when they met. So with distorted grief reactions, you see people who are stuck. They can't move forward in their lives. They obsess or ruminate and become depressed, and really try and recapture something that was lost. And as part of that, there's an idealization that goes with it. An idealization of Daisy and who she was, and an inability to see her flaws or the flaws in their relationship. And so he's stuck on this ideal image, that green light floating across the dock that he's looking out for and reaching towards. But the more he tries to get back to that time, the more he can't recapture it. He can't rebuild the life that once was. And so he's stuck not being able to go back to the past and recreate that life, but stuck not being able to move forward either. And that's where his great tragedy comes in.
He really explains it very well. And F. Scott Fitzgerald does a great job of making us feel that there is no shame and no guilt amongst the characters until you get to the end of the movie. When you get to the end of the movie, the shame and guilt starts to percolate, and you see the results of that shame and guilt as some of the characters act out who they really are when pressed with stress points in the movie. So F. Scott Fitzgerald was very brilliant at presenting a movie to you, or a book, and in this case the movie, where you feel like, wow, life was just perfect. Everybody was happy, everybody was dressed nicely, nice cars, nice house, but then as time goes on and problems start to arise, you find that Jay Gatsby has a lot of shame about where he's from, which is this poor family out in the Midwest. And but that during the movie, you don't get that feel that there's any shame at all. You feel like maybe this man is living the perfect life in the Hamptons. But then by the time he and his ends up being his arch enemy, they collide, and then you see a whole different thing going on. That's between Tom Buchanan, the husband of the woman that Jay Gatsby is in love with. And then you see that actually Jay Gatsby is very ashamed of where he's from. So, you know, that was a bitter, the bitter truth about this time, that some of the people may have been reaching too far in reaching for something that they could not hold on to in their worst of times. So, something to think about. Great work from Dr. Jared DeFife right there with the psychoanalysis of the film. And as you're watching the film, you will see a lot of the elements that I've been speaking about during the semester. In particular, there is this dance called the Charleston that we spoke about earlier. And, you know, it's a simple dance where you kick your feet out as you take steps back and forth. And we're going to look at some footage of people doing the Charleston. And then after that, we're going to look at footage of people doing it in The Great Gatsby. So here's the Charleston, just a little bit of review for you. Notice how the band always ends with the drummer hitting the cymbal. I thought that was kind of funny. Da-da-da-da-da-da, you know. Drummers don't end songs like that anymore, thank God. Or the rest of the band would throw something at them. But yeah, that was like a cliche back then. Anyways, now we're going to look at the same dance in The Great Gatsby. So see if you can identify the dance. You'll see a lot of the same elements. This time you'll see a man and a woman doing it. Here we go.
Chat later, old school. All right.
Clip Springer. You must be awake. Shall we?
I wish I'd done everything on earth with you. All my life. I wish it could always be like this.
It will be. If only it had been enough for Gatsby, just to hold Daisy. But he had a grand vision for his life and Daisy's part in it.
All right, so you got to see the Charleston when they were dancing together. An underlying theme in this film is the idea of new money versus old money. So you have Jay Gatsby, who has new money, and it's not totally clear that the money he earned was not done so by illegal means, because they make it clear that he's involved in some kind of illegal type of market by his associations with some mobsters in the movie, and but at the same time, he has relationships with bankers and people like that, so it could also be that he made money in the stock market. But they leave it kind of ambiguous that he could have made money in either area. So he represented new money, regardless of how he got it, but he had a lot of money. He was new money. Daisy and Tom Buchanan, the woman he was dancing with, Daisy, she represents old money. And a lot of those characters in the movie, they have inherited wealth. So maybe their great-great-great-great-great-grandparents did something to earn a lot of money, and then they lived off of the gains and the investments of that money, right? So in Long Island, this is where the rub happens between these two groups, particularly Jay Gatsby on one side and then Daisy and Tom, her husband. So this was a duel of some sort, I guess you could say, between these two groups, and it was just basically based on, you just made your money, our money has lasted for generations. The other side of that is that the new money people usually work really hard, and in this case, that is the case. The old money people with Daisy and Tom, they don't work as hard because they don't have to work as hard. Their lives exist based off of connections that their families have made long ago. So their lives are more relaxed but at the same time, they don't respect new money. You understand what I mean? Old money, we've been here a longer time. We have more money than you in a lot of instances, and you're new money. New money tends to flaunt it more, as Jay Gatsby did. He had these lavish parties, and he went over the top with everything. At the same time, he was more of a figure that was presented as someone who was a hard worker, where with Tom and Daisy, they didn't have to work as hard. So when you watch these three characters in the film, you'll get that feeling. You never really hear about, or you never see Tom making any moves towards making money, because his money's made. Where with Jay Gatsby, he has his assistants whispering into his ear, so is on the phone, they like to speed to you, he's making deals. So at the same time, my point is that these two groups did not like each other, and that there was a struggle between the two groups, and that is part of the reason why Jay Gatsby constantly was trying to prove himself to everybody by spending a lot of money, by having these huge parties, by just going over the top with everything, because he was trying to prove himself to be accepted by old money, to be respected, okay? Now, if I can give you a modern day example of this kind of relationship or this kind of duel between the two groups, I'd say take someone like Andrew Carnegie. You'll see his picture right here. Okay, so Andrew Carnegie was the leader of the American steel industry. His estate is worth about $350 billion. $350 billion, right? And then we have the hip hop artist Eminem. He's worth about $190 million. He's still rich, but that's new money. That's new rich. $190 million. Still a lot of money, but when you compare it to $350 billion, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. So you can imagine that if Eminem loved a woman from the Carnegie family, that there would be a little bit of a rub going down, because his wealth is not as plentiful as the old money. And you can just look at that number, 190 million is quite a long ways from 1 billion. 190 million, 19% of 1 billion. Carnegie has 350 of those 1,000 millions for the young people, just to put it into perspective. So this is the dynamic that's happening in The Great Gatsby, that you have new money that's not being respected by old money. New money is spending a lot of money, trying to gain the respect, and ultimately Daisy Buchanan by Jay Gatsby. But as you'll see in the movie, it never really happens. So the struggle that goes on intensifies at one point, and then Jay Gatsby loses his cool. And you're going to see the climax of this struggle going on between old money and new money in this clip. So let's take a look at this clip.
Can't you see who this guy is? With his house, and his parties, and his fancy clothes. Here's just a front for a wolfshine, a gangster, to get his claws into respectable folk like Walter Chase.
The only respectable thing about you, old sport, is your money. Your money, that's it. I have just as much as you. That means we're equal.
Oh, no. We're different. I am, they are, she is. We're all different from you. You see, we were born different. Sit on blood.
Steal nothing that you do, say or steal, or dream up. Just take that.
Girl like this.
You shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Gatsby looked in that moment as if he had killed a man.
My sincerest apologies. I seem to have lost my temper.
That's right, Mr. Gatsby. Show us some of those fine Oxford manners.
So you can see the relationship intensified as Tom Buchanan, the huskier guy, pointed out that Jay Gatsby was not actually from money. And it was revealed that he came from a poor background. And so Jay Gatsby lost it. That's important to note because during this time, there was a wider gap between people who had money and people who did not have money. So that was really a way to kind of chronicle some of that pain that he felt because he had came out of poverty, he gained a lot of money, but at the same time, he was not respected as being a wealthy person. And this same kind of classism existed during the war, that people from World War I had gained a lot of money from being involved in the industry of making money from the war. And I spoke about this a few weeks ago. And then you had people who had no way of getting to that wealth at all, that they were middle class or poor, and that they just would never get to it. Here, Jay Gatsby actually gets to that wealth and is able to pull himself out of poverty, but at the end of the day, he was not respected because he did not come from that. So that's a struggle that exists in The Great Gatsby. And also, Nick Carraway, his friend, the writer, has to deal with some of this as well in regards to having access to a woman from the upper crust of society. So look at this clip, and even he has to deal with it. Although it does not become a theme in the movie or a point of pain, he does have to deal with it. So here we go.
The world and accompanying fireworks!
Come on, Nick. Look around you. Rich girls don't marry poor boys. She's mine.
The face is familiar. Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war?
Oh, yes, the 9th Battalion.
I was in the 7th.
Excuse me.
I knew you looked familiar. Having a good time, old sport?
Oh, the whole thing's incredible. I live just next door. He sent me an actual invitation. Seems I'm the only one. I still haven't met Mr. Gatsby. No one's met him. They say he's 3rd cousin to the Kaiser and 2nd cousin to the devil.
I'm afraid I haven't been a very good host, old sport. You see, I'm Gatsby.
His smile was one of those rare smiles that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It seemed to understand you and believe in you just as you would like to be understood and believed in.
Sorry, old sport. I thought you knew.
Please, just... I don't know what to say. Please forgive me.
It's quite all right.
I've had so much to drink.
Yes.
Mr. Gatsby, sir, Chicago.
So you can see he was called a poor boy. And that, I think, being that he was, he didn't have access to that life, that he befriended Jay Gatsby, and then he had a window into that world. And he ended up being a trusted friend of Jay Gatsby, which was different from everyone else in the film, but he actually really liked him. So these are two people who were from lesser means, who rose up and who were looking at the American dream as their goal that they wanted to achieve. And so F. Scott Fitzgerald does a very good job of letting us know that there was a dream that they were reaching for, an American dream that they wanted to pursue, and that they were pursuing it, but then you find out that there's some other events that changed the trajectory of that pursuit of the American dream. And now I want to go to the next photo. Okay, right here you see the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. And this is a direct symbol related to, it's a symbol that's directly related to moral judgment. So in the film, you see these eyes hanging from this billboard. And it's a common reoccurring visual theme, which says basically that the people are sinning a lot, and that these eyes represent the eyes of God looking down on American society as a sort of moral wasteland. And this goes along with the struggle of the young generation struggle to be free of moral constraints, and also the flappers and how they also wanted to be free as women, and then how the new business millionaires who were pursuing the American dream, who chose to be more expressive, to live their lives more freely. So there's this contrast of these eyes looking at them as they are living their lives, saying that you are morally corrupt, that you are sinners. And so that's an area where you can you can think about. And when you think about, are these people really morally corrupt just because they are deciding to live outside of what society expected them to be? Does that mean they're morally corrupt? That's a question to think about, because they're not following what their grandfathers told them to do. Does that mean that they're morally corrupt? Are they sinners? Something to think about. Because you could look at anybody in the society, really, and if you examine their lives, you'll find that most people do not live or walk a straight line. But does that mean that they are morally corrupt? No good. Get them out of here. Because the characters these characters in this book had to break away from the old in order to come to the new. And I spoke about that a few weeks ago, where these people during the Jazz Age were purposely moving away, did not want to be a part of the old way of thinking. Could they have done that? Could they have made the strides that they made as American citizens had they not challenged the morals of the day? Something to think about, because that begs the question or the attitude of saying, she's not a good girl, referring to a woman who doesn't just do what she's told. She's not a good girl because she doesn't do what she's told, but yet these women changed the world during the women's suffrage movement. They just changed how people saw women. They taught society how to respect women, gave women the right to vote. Does that mean they're immoral? Something to think about. I don't think so. But those eyes are looking at everybody as they're making their strides in society, and they're saying, you know what, you're immoral, you're corrupt. So my opinion is not important. I just want to present this to you, that these eyes represented that throughout the film. Okay. Now we're going to see, this is New York City during the time, hustle and bustle. And that is Times Square. That is the city that everyone in the Great Gatsby is leaving or going to. As you can see, the lifestyle there is totally different from the lifestyle, the images that existed in the film. that this is the hustle and bustle. And New York is always seen as being this place of sin, of moral corruptness throughout the film. You can tell by the characters that are around Jay Gatsby when he's being featured in the movie. He's often around, when he's in New York, he's around mobsters or people just doing things that are questionable. So New York City is never really looked at as being a wholesome place. The Midwest is seen as being a wholesome part of the country. That's how F. Scott Fitzgerald really characterized New York City, and the opposite for the Midwest. That's how he felt about these two cities and about what they represented. And as I told you, F. Scott Fitzgerald was from the Midwest as well. So he could clearly identify the differences that he saw between the two regions. And he very, very skillfully made that world of New York totally different from the Midwest. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to leave you with the final scene from The Great Gatsby. And this is probably the saddest part of the movie, because at this point, Jay Gatsby has been killed, and there is a funeral, but no one shows up to the funeral. Not even the woman that he was in love with during the whole movie. She didn't send flowers or anything. And at this point, Nick Carraway is realizing that he was Jay Gatsby's only friend, and that he was the only one that cared for him. So all those people that you see in the dance scenes and everything, none of those people are in the last scene. And so that just kind of shows that F. Scott Fitzgerald felt that a lot of the people who were partying and carrying on were self-centered, that at the end of the day, they only cared about themselves. This is what he's saying in the movie. And then that kind of begs to wonder if the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eichelberg were in fact right or wrong, because no one's at this man's funeral, and you would think that somebody would show up and at least say, hey, he used to throw the best parties or whatever, but no one does. It's just Nick Carraway and Jay Gatsby. So we're going to look at this scene now. Here we go. Last scene.
I rang, I wrote, I implored, but not a single one of the sparkling hundreds that enjoyed his hospitality attended the funeral. And from Daisy, not even a flower. I was all he had, the only one who cared. After Gatsby's death, New York was haunted for me. That city, my once golden, shimmering mirage, now made me sick. On my last night in New York, I returned to that huge, incoherent house once more. Wolfsheim's associates had cleaned it out.
Through all those parties, hoping she'd wander in one night.
It's like an amusement park.
But how do you live here all alone?
She makes it look so splendid. Don't you think, old sport?
Music, so that we can dance.
Will you come, old sport? We need you.
I wish it could always be like this.
It will be.
I remembered how we had all come come to Gatsby's and guessed at his corruption, while he stood before us, concealing an incorruptible dream. The moon rose higher, and as I stood there brooding on the old, unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come such a long way, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. But he did not know that it was already behind him. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
So we just saw the final scene. Very, very sad and solemn when you look at what happened in terms of people not coming to support Jay Gatsby at the end of the movie. And F. Scott Fitzgerald did a really magnificent job at writing a decrescendo to such a vibrant lifestyle that they lived. And so he pulls it all back to show you that the characters, rather the people who used to enjoy their times with Jay Gatsby, how they didn't even go to his funeral, that Nick Carraway was really the only character who was there, who was his real friend. So F. Scott Fitzgerald did a really great job at making his point that a lot of the people in that time were just living an iniquitous lifestyle, and that they were just along for the ride and really interested in living life to its fullest, but that morally he feels like maybe there was some blank spots, you know. So that's something to check out. But that concludes this session. But before I end the session, I'd like to talk about a couple things. I have a show at the World Stage on Saturday, October the 28th. It will be with my group, my jazz group, and we'll be playing some original songs as well as some songs by other people as well. And so if you get a chance, come on out to that show, maybe even let someone else know about it. They have my website up there, teodrosavery.com. You can always keep up with what I'm doing in terms of playing music on my calendar. You can see where I am, where I'm performing, and everything like that. So do check us out if you can on the 28th of October. Also, I'd like to remind the people who are musicians that if you are near LA, to please apply to our music program here at Dominguez Hills. There is the URL right there. You can go to the website and read information about what it takes to apply here. Dr. Scott Morris is the head of the music program, and he's doing a lot of great things. And it would be very, very beneficial to you if you apply to our music program here. Well, that concludes session 10, and I will see many of you online. And for those of you who I will not see online, I will see you next week during session 11. All right, so thank you very much, and I'll see you later. All right, peace. Okay. Cool.